Welcome back to the Religious Studies Podcast. As always, this deep dive is AI generated and totally fact checked by our expert. So don't worry about that.
Yeah,
You're getting the good stuff.
definitely.
Today, we are going deep on Nietzsche
Okay.
and his ideas on guilt,
Right.
bad conscience, and how that all ties into how religion evolved.
Cool.
We'll mainly be using his essay, Guilt, Bad Conscience, and that's from on the Genealogy of Morals.
Yeah.
But we're also going to bring in some stuff from the book's preface and his note about how the text came about.
That's going to be good.
Yeah, so to kick us off, Nietzsche has this really interesting idea about promises.
Right.
He says humans are like the only ones who can make promises.
Yeah.
And that to do that, you need memory, foresight, self-control, like a whole bunch of stuff you don't see in animals.
Yeah.
What's the big deal about this for Nietzsche, though?
Well, it all goes back to his idea of the will to power.
Okay.
You know, for Nietzsche, making a promise, that's a powerful thing. Because it's like you're saying, this is going to happen.
Yeah.
And you're making it happen by keeping that promise.
Oh, I see.
You're controlling time in a way.
Wow.
It's like a human way of shaping the world.
That's pretty deep. It makes you think about those times when you make a serious promise.
Right.
Does it feel,
Like you're in control.
yeah, powerful? Maybe a little scary?
Yeah.
Nietzsche might say those feelings like leftovers from way back in our evolution.
Interesting.
But here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Early humans didn't have the same memory as us.
Right.
So how did they make sure people kept their word?
It wasn't pretty.
Oh,
Nietzsche says pain and rituals were super important to
definitely.
remember and enforce agreements.
Okay.
He talks about some really awful stuff, like stoning people, breaking them on the wheel.
Wow.
It's hard to imagine.
Yeah.
But it shows how brutal those early societies were.
Those are definitely some intense examples.
Yeah.
Today we have things like laws, right?
Yeah. Social pressure.
But it makes you wonder,
Mm-hmm.
do we still have some of that connection between pain and keeping promises?
That's a good question.
Like, does it still affect us?
I don't know.
And this is where it gets crazy.
What's that?
Nietzsche says we're totally wrong about guilt.
Really? How so?
He says it wasn't about morality at all in the beginning.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah.
What was it about them?
It was like owing someone something.
Like a debt.
Yeah. Guilt was about a debt.
Okay.
And punishment was how you made sure they paid up.
Ah, I
It
see.
all goes back to those early economic systems,
Interesting.
like bartering and stuff.
Yeah.
It was about who had power, not good versus evil.
Wow, that really changes how you see guilt.
Right.
Like, does it even matter today then?
Yeah, it makes you think about our whole system of morality. Like, where did it all come from?
It's pretty deep.
And then Nietzsche goes on to talk about how the soul came about.
Oh, okay. So how does that fit in?
Well, he says that as humans started living together, all our instincts, like aggression and cruelty, had to be hidden.
Right.
We couldn't just act them out anymore.
Okay.
So he says we turned them inward.
Like on ourselves.
Exactly.
Wow.
That's how the bad conscience was born.
So like instead of being mean to others,
Mm-hmm.
we feel guilty and ashamed.
Yeah.
It's like we punish ourselves.
It's kind of like our anxieties were there from the very beginning.
Fascinating. And this connects to his idea of master and slave morality, right?
Yeah, he says we started valuing weakness because we resented the strong.
It's a controversial idea,
Definitely.
but it makes you think about how power shapes our values.
It's like we internalized the voice of power,
Yeah,
and now it judges us from the inside.
I see. And this is where religion comes in, right?
Exactly. Nietzsche says this bad conscience,
Okay.
plus the need to keep those powerful ancestors happy.
Who became gods.
Yeah,
Right.
led to all this self-punishment and the idea of a god who wants to punish us.
So basically we took our guilt and made it huge.
Yeah, like cosmic level guilt.
Interesting. He uses Christianity as an example.
Right.
Like God sacrificing himself to forgive us. It shows how much we need to be punished.
This whole idea of a god who wants us to suffer is pretty dark.
Yeah.
But if that's how guilt evolved, are we still acting that out today?
You mean like in our lives and beliefs?
Yeah. Are anxieties and religions just echoes of this need to be punished?
That's a really chilling thought.
It is.
And one we're going to keep exploring as we go deeper into Nietzsche's ideas.
Definitely.
Yeah, it really is a chilling thought. And what's so fascinating about Nietzsche is he doesn't just point this out, you know, this connection between guilt and religion and punishment.
Right.
He actually looks at how it all developed historically. It makes you question things we just accept as normal.
Yeah, like if guilt and punishment come from these power struggles and not from some kind of inner moral compass,
Right.
then what does that mean for our legal system today?
Right.
Or even the idea of justice? It makes you wonder if we're really that different from those early societies.
It definitely makes you look deeper than the surface.
And this is where Nietzsche's ideas about memory are really important.
Okay.
He says that for morality to evolve, memory had to become more complex.
Interesting.
Earlier you talked about those brutal punishments.
Yeah.
It seemed like those painful memories were a way to enforce the rules.
Like a deterrent.
Yeah, but how did we go from that kind of external physical memory to this internal guilt we feel?
That's what Nietzsche tries to explain. He says early humans needed those external forms of memory.
Like rituals and physical punishment.
Exactly, because their internal memory wasn't as developed.
Okay.
But as human memory evolved, those external forms became internalized.
So instead of being publicly shamed or physically hurt, we now feel guilt and shame on the inside.
Right, it's like we became our own punishers.
That's a pretty wild idea.
And Nietzsche says this internalization of punishment is how the soul developed. Yeah, this inner world of thoughts, feelings, and judgments.
Wow. It's like he's connecting something as abstract as the soul to actual historical events.
Exactly. He's making these ideas more concrete and thought-provoking.
And he doesn't shy away from the negative side of this either.
Right.
He says this bad conscience, this internalized guilt, can make us really suffer.
It's true. It's like we've turned our aggression against ourselves.
Instead of directing it outward.
Yeah, we punish ourselves with guilt and shame. Like we're afraid of our own instincts.
That's a really interesting way to put it. And Nietzsche links this self-punishment directly to religion.
Especially Christianity.
So he sees Christianity as the result of all this internalized guilt.
In a way.
Like we had to invent a God who wants us to suffer for our sins because we were already doing it to ourselves.
That's a very Nietzschean take. He says the idea of a holy God who demands atonement reflects our deep need to be punished. It's like we projected our bad conscience onto this divine figure who then demands we suffer even more.
It's a pretty disturbing thought when you think about it that way. So are we just stuck in this cycle of guilt and self-punishment forever? Is there no way out?
That's where Nietzsche's thinking shifts, and we get to one of his most controversial ideas, the sovereign individual.
I've heard that term, but I'm not really sure what it means.
Basically, it's where Nietzsche starts to offer a way forward, a way to break free from this cycle of guilt and resentment. The sovereign individual is someone who's achieved a high level of self-mastery and independence.
Okay.
They've freed themselves from conventional morality and created their own values based on a deep understanding of themselves and the world.
So they're not just rebelling against society. There's more to it than that.
Absolutely. The sovereign individual is driven by a powerful will to power a desire to create their own destiny. They're not content to follow the crowd. They want to make their own path.
That makes sense. But didn't Nietzsche also say this kind of freedom could be dangerous? Like, what's to stop someone from becoming a tyrant if they're creating their own morality?
He did. He recognized that the sovereign individual is rare and that the path to self-mastery is risky. He warned against people who just want power or who aren't strong enough to use it responsibly.
So it's not just about asserting your will, but also about having the wisdom and self-awareness to use that will for good?
Exactly. The sovereign individual, as Nietzsche sees them, is not a tyrant or a nihilist. They've gone beyond the limits of traditional morality and reached a higher level of ethical consciousness.
It's a pretty high bar to reach.
It is. But Nietzsche believed it was worth striving for. He saw the sovereign individual as the ultimate expression of human potential, our ability to overcome ourselves and create something new.
I can see why that idea would appeal to people, especially today. We live in a world where conformity is often valued more than individuality.
Yeah.
And it's easy to lose sight of our own inner compass. But if even Nietzsche recognized the dangers of this path, how do we know if we're on the right track? How do we become sovereign individuals without giving in to those darker impulses?
That's a great question, and one that gets to the heart of Nietzsche's philosophy. It's something we can explore further in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we've talked about how becoming a sovereign individual, like Nietzsche talks about, isn't about just grabbing power for yourself.
Right.
It's about something much deeper, like mastering yourself so you can create your own values.
Yeah.
But how do we actually do that without messing it up?
Right.
It seems like it'd be easy to just become selfish and call it self-discovery.
You've hit on a really important point.
Yeah,
Nietzsche doesn't give us a step-by-step guide or anything. He thought it was a really tough path full of challenges.
I could see that.
It takes a lot of honesty with yourself and being willing to face some hard truths about yourself and the world.
So no easy answers then.
Not really.
Just a lot of soul-searching and tough questions.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
But Nietzsche does give us some hints in his writing.
Okay, like what?
He talks about how important self-knowledge is.
Like knowing yourself.
Exactly. Understanding what drives you and why you do things.
Okay.
He also says we need to face our shadow selves.
Our shadow selves. What's that?
It's like all those dark impulses we try to hide.
Oh.
He says we have to face them directly if we want to control them and use them for good.
That makes sense.
Oh.
If we just pretend they're not there,
Yeah.
they'll probably just come out in other ways.
Exactly. Maybe even in ways that hurt us or others.
So how does all this connect to creating our own values?
Well, Nietzsche thought that real values come from deeply understanding ourselves and the world around us.
Mm-hmm.
They don't come from someone else telling you what's right or wrong.
Sorry.
They come from your own experiences and what you learn from them.
I see.
The sovereign individual doesn't just throw out all traditional morality.
Right.
They go beyond it by creating a new system that fits who they really are.
That sounds like a lot of responsibility, though.
It is.
If we're making our own values, how do we know they're good values?
That's the tough part.
What's to stop us from just doing whatever we want and saying it's okay because we're creating our own rules?
That's the risk. Nietzsche acknowledges that.
So how do we avoid that?
He believed that the sovereign individual is always testing and refining their values.
Like an ongoing process.
Exactly. They're not afraid to question themselves and their beliefs.
And they're always trying to live up to their ideals.
Right. It's not about reaching some perfect state and then stopping.
It's about constantly growing and changing.
Yeah, Nietzsche's philosophy is all about becoming.
Becoming.
Yeah, pushing yourself and embracing the fact that life is always changing.
This whole conversation has been really eye-opening, honestly.
It's been great talking with you.
Yeah, it's made me think about guilt and religion and even myself in completely new ways.
Me too.
What's the one thing you hope people take away from this deep dive?
I hope they see how complex Nietzsche's ideas really are.
Yeah.
He wasn't about giving easy answers or simple solutions. His philosophy is more like a challenge. Yeah, like he's pushing us to question what we believe and face those uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the world.
Right.
But within that challenge, there's a huge potential for growth, for discovering who you are, and maybe even for finding a kind of freedom.
That's a great way to put it. And hey, maybe some of our listeners are even on the path to becoming sovereign individuals themselves.
Maybe so.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Nietzsche. It's been a wild ride.
It has. Thanks for having me.